Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. We're now still in book two, where we just covered in the last session I think it was the spring of the second year, and now we're going to be covering the well, I mean, we'll see. The winter is going to be the chapters on the winter of the second year are going to be kind of brief, maybe even too brief, and then we'll have to go to the spring of the third year, the spring and summer of the third year. So let's go on, starting where we left off. We left off around 69, 69, 70, chapter 70. I think we'll start 70. Um, um, yeah, 70 will be 69 will be at 69, where we left off at such. It says right here. Here it says such were the events of the summer. Again, just to remind you, we're using the landmark Thucydides edited by Strassman, which is the Crawley translation. I make corrections in here as we go through. We're using Google Books' version that you see on the screen. Let's turn to the chapter 69. Such were the events of the summer. Right? That was the previous thing. In the ensuing winter, the Athenians sent 20 ships around the Peloponnese and under the command of Phoromeno, who stationed himself at Naupactus and kept watch against any one sailing in and out of Corinth and the Carassian Gulf. Six others went to Cara and Lachian under Mysander to collect tribute in those parts and prevent the Peloponnesian privateers from taking up any their station in those waters and molesting passage of merchantmen from Perilous and Phoenicia and the adjoining continent. However, Melander, going up the country into Lycia with a force of Athenians with ships in Athens, was defeated and killed in battle with the loss of a number of his troops. So he went into inland and got killed. Melander did so. Um, Now, next chapter 70. That same winter at Podian, at length, the Podians at length found themselves no longer able to hold out against their besiegers. The inroads of the Peloponnesians into Attica had not had the desired effect of making Athenians raise the siege. There were left no provisions left, and so far had distress for food gone in Padilla that, beside a number of other horrors, instances even occurred of people having eaten one another. So in this extremity, they at least made proposal for capitulating to the Athenian generals in command against them. Xenophon, son of Euripides, Aristodas, son of Aristocles, and uh, 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 Panomachus, son of Callimachus. The generals accepted their provisions, seeing the suffering of the army, and so expected a position, beside which the city had already spent 2,000 talents up on the siege. The terms of surrender, capitulation, were followed: a free passage out for themselves, their children, their wives, auxiliaries, with one garment apiece, and the women with two, and a fixed sum of money for their journey. Under this treaty, they were sent out to Chalcidice and other places according as was in their power. And the Athenians, however, blamed the generals for granting terms without instructions from home, being an option that they could have gained control of the city without granting terms. They afterwards sent settlers of their own to Padilla and colonized it. Such were the events of the winter, and so ended the second year of the Peloponnese, the second year of which Thucydides was the historian. So, in other words, he ends the second year of the war at this point. Now, I think we should go on. I'm going to go on. I'm going to do winter of second year and spring of the next year. Um, Here it goes. This is chapter. So 69 and 70 was clearly aimed at the winter. It's very short, two entries, two chapters. Now, the summer of the third year. The next summer, the Peloponnesian allies, instead of invading Attica, marched against Plataea under the command of Archidamus, son of Zeuxidamus, and king of the Spartans. He had camped his army and was about to lay waste to the country when the Paulicians hastened to send envoys to him. They spoke as follows: Amadeus, Archidamus, and Spartans, invading the Palatine territory, you do what is wrong in itself, and worthy neither of yourselves nor your fathers who begat you. Panuasius, son of Cleobrotus, your countryman, after freeing Hellas from the Medes, with the help of those Hellenes who were willing to undertake the risk of the battle fought near our city, offered sacrifices to Zeus, the liberator, and the Agora of Plataea, and calling on all the allies together, restored to their Palatine city and their territory, and declared it independent and inviolable against aggression or conquest. Should any such be attempted, the allies present were to help according to their power. Your fathers rewarded us thus for the courage and patriotism, zeal that we displayed at that perilous epoch. But you do just the contrary, coming with our bitterest enemies, the Thebans, to enslave us. We appeal, therefore, to the gods to whom the oath were then made, to the gods of your ancestors, and at least to those of our country, and call upon you to refrain violating our territory and transgression the oath, and let us live independently as Panusius decreed. Okay, now we go to the next. This is so summer of the third year. The Spartans have that thing. This is that map of their. You can go check it on the text if you have the text. The Phoenicians had got this thus far when they were cut short by Archidamus, saying, "There is justice, Palatian, in what you say, if you act up on your words. However, according to the grant of Panusius, continue to be independent yourselves, and join in freeing those who of your fellow countrymen who, after sharing in the perils of that period, joined in oaths to you and others now subjects to the Athenians. For it is to free them, and the rest that all this provision in war has been made. I wish that you would share our labor and obeyed by the oath yourselves. It is impossible. For if this is impossible, do what we have already required of you. Remain neutral, enjoying your own, joining neither side. Receive both as friends and neither as allies of the war. With this we shall be satisfied." Such was the word of Amadeus. The Plataeans, after hearing this, what he had to say, went to the city and acquainted the people with what had been passed, and presently returned for the answer that it was impossible for them to do what he proposed without consulting the Athenians, with whom their children and wives were. Besides that, they had fears for their city. After his departure, what was to prevent the Athenians from coming and taking it out of their hands, or the Thebans, who would be included in the oaths, from taking advantage of the proposed neutrality to make a second attempt on the city? Upon these points, he tried to reassure them by saying, "You have to deliver over the city and the house to us Spartans, to point out the boundaries of your land and the numbers of your fruit trees, and whatever else can be numerically stated, and yourselves, and withdraw wherever you'd like as long as the war should last. Where it is over, we will restore to you whatever we received, and in the interim hold it in trust and keep it in cultivation, paying you sufficient allowance." When they heard what he had to say, they re-entered the city, and after consulting the people with what they said, wished first to acquaint the Athenians with this proposal, and the event of their approving to accede it. In the meantime, they asked to grant them a truce and not lay waste their territory. He accordingly granted a truce for a number of days requisite for the journey, and meanwhile abstained from ravaging their territories. The Plataean envoys went to Athens and consulted with the Athenians and returned with um, the following message to those in the city. The Athenians say, Plataeans, that they have never since we became their allies on any occasion abandon you to an enemy, nor will they now neglect you, but but will help you according to their ability. And they solemnly call upon you by the oaths which your father swore to keep the alliance unaltered. Next chapter, chapter 74. On delivery of this message, the envoys, the Plataeans resolved not to be unfaithful to the Athenians, but to endure, if it must be, seeing that their lands laid waste and any other trials might come to them, and not send out again, but to answer from the walls that it was impossible for them to do as the Spartans proposed. As soon as it as B had, as soon as he, again, this B, this is a typo, I don't know what's going on here, and he had received this answer, King Archidamos proceeded to make a solemn appeal to the gods and heroes of the country in the following words: Ye gods and heroes of the Plataean territory, be my witnesses, and not an aggressor originally, nor until these had first departed from the common oaths. We did invade this land in which our fathers offered you their prayer before defeating the Medes, in which you made favorable to the Hellenic arms. Not, nor shall we be aggressors in the measures to which we may now resort, since we have made fair proposals to have but not been successful. Graciously accord that those who were the first to offend may be punished for it, and the vengeance may be obtained by those who righteously inflict it. After the appeal to the gods of to the gods, Archidamos put his army into motion. First, he enclosed the city with a palisade formed by the with a palisade formed of the fruit trees, in which they cut down to prevent further exit from Pelida. Next day, they threw up a mound against the city, hoping that the largeness of the force employed would ensure the speedy reduction of the place. They accordingly cut down timber from the Kitulun and built it up on either side, laying it like lattice to serve as a wall to keep the mound from spreading abroad, and carried to it wood, stone, and earth, and whatever other material might complete it. They continued to work as the mound for 70 days and nights without intermission, having divided into relief parties to allow some to be employed in carrying, or others to sleep and take refreshment. Um, uh, the Spartans officer attached to each contingent, keeping the men to the work. But the Plataeans, observing the progress of the mound, constructed a wall of wood and fixed it up on the part of the city wall against which the mound was being erected, and built up bricks inside it, which they took from the neighboring houses. And timbers served to bind the building together and prevent it from becoming weak as as it advanced in height. It had also a covering of skins and hides, which protected the woodwork against attacks of burning missiles and allowed the men to work safely. Thus, the wall was raised to a great height, and the mound opposite made no less rapid progress. The Plataeans also thought of another expedient. They pulled out part of the wall upon which the mound abutted and carried the earth into the city. Discovering this, the Peloponnesian twisted up the clay in rattles and reeds and threw it in the breach formed in the mound, in order to give it constancy and prevent it from being carried away like the soil. Stopped in this way, the Plataeans changed their mode of operation, and digging a mine from the city, calculated the way under the mound and began to carry off its material as before. This went on as long a while without the enemy outside finding it out, so that for all they threw on top of the mound made no progress in proportion, being carried away from beneath and constantly setting down in the vacuum. But the Paulicians, fearing that even thus they might not be able to hold out against the superior force of the enemy, had another invention. They stopped working on large building in front of the mound and started at either end of the inside of the old low wall, build a new one in form of a crescent running in towards the city in order that the event of the Great Wall being taken, this would remain. And if the enemy have to throw up a fresh mound against it as they advance, they might not only have trouble over them, but also be exposed to missiles on their flank. While raising the mound and a mound, the Peloponnesian also brought up siege engines against the city, which was brought up on the mound against the great building that shook. Okay, move over here. That shook down a great piece of it, and to no small alarm of the Paulicians. Others were advanced against the different parts of the wall, but all were lassoed and broken by the Palatines, who also hung up a great beam by long iron chains from the either extremity of the two poles laid on the wall and projecting over it, and drew them up at angles, whatever, at any point which threatened by the engine. And losing their hold, let the beam go with its chain slack, so that it fell freely and snapped off the noose of the battering ram. Now, 677. After this, the Peloponnesians, finding their siege engine effected nothing, and that their mound was meant by the counterwork, concluded that their present means of offense were unequal to the taking of the city, and prepared for its circumvallation, which means go around it. First, however, they determined to try the effect of fire and see whether they could or not, with the help of a wind, burn the city. And it was not a large one. Indeed, they thought of an even possible expedient by which the place might be reduced without the expense of a siege. They accordingly brought bundles of bushwoods and throw them from the mound, and first into the space between the walls, and this soon became full from the numbers of hands at work. They next heaped up the faggots up as far as into the city as they could reach from the top, and they lighted the wood by setting fire to it with sulfur and pitch. The consequence was a fire greater than anyone has ever yet produced by human agency, though it could not, of course, be compared to the spontaneous conflagrations known to occur sometimes through the wind rubbing against the branches of mountains forced together. And this fire was not only remarkable for its magnitude, but also at the end of so many perils, which an ace of proving fatal to the Plataeans. The greater part of the city became entirely inaccessible, and the wind and had a wind blow upon it in accordance with the hope of the enemy. Nothing could have saved them. It was there was a story of a heavy, as it was, there was a story of a heavy rain and thunder having come by, which the fire was put out, and the danger averted. Okay, now is that it started as burning on, it's starting to take its effect, and all of a sudden, heavy rain and thunder put the fire out. They pray to gods come. Failing in this later attempt, now this is at 78, failing at this later attempt, the Peloponnesians left the portions of their forces on the spot, dismissing the rest, and built a wall of circulation around the city, dividing the ground among the various cities present. A ditch being made within and without the lines from which they got their bricks. All being finished by the raising of Arcturus, they left men enough to man half the wall, and rest being manned by Boeotians, and drawing off their army, dispersed to several cities. The Paulicians, before they sent off their wives and children and the oldest men, and the masses of non-combatants to Athens. So the number of the besieged left in the place comprised 400 of their citizens, 80 Athenians, and 110 women to bake their bread. This was the total sum of the commencement of the speech, and no one else within the walls, bond or free. Such were the arrangements made for the blockade of Patlitia. The same summer, and simultaneously with the expedition against Plataea, the Athenians marched with 2,000 hoplites and 200 horse against the Chalcidians in the Thracian region and the Boeotians, just as the corn was getting ripe. under the command of Xenophon, son of Euripides, with two colleagues. Before arriving before Spartolus, a Boeotian, they destroyed the corn and had hope of the city coming over through the intrigues of a faction within. But those of a different way of thinking had sent Olinus and a garrison of hoplites, and the other troops arrived accordingly. Those issuing from Spartolus were engaged by the Athenians in front of the city, and Caledonia's hoplites, with some of the auxiliaries of them, were beaten and retreated into Spartolus. But the Calesian horse and light troop defeated the horse and light troops of the Athenians. The Caledonians were already had a few pellets from Croesus, and presently after the battle were joined by some of the Olinos. Upon seeing the light troops of Spartus emboldened by this extra force, and by their previous success with the help of the Caladian horse and the reinforcement just arrived, again attacked the Athenians, who retired upon the two divisions which they had left with their baggage. Whenever the Athenians advanced, their adversaries gave way, pressing them with missiles the instant they began to retire. The Caladian horse also ride up and charging them just as they pleased, with at least caused a panic among the routed and pursued them with great dangers. The Athenians took refuge in Patidama, and afterwards recovered their dead under truce and returned to Athens with the remnants of their army. 430 men and all the generals have fallen. The Gladians and the Boeotians set up a trophy, took up their dead, and dispersed to the several cities. The long summer, not long after this, the Ambracians and the Calesians, having desirous of reducing the whole of Arcania and detaching it from Athens, persuade the Spartans to equip a fleet from their confederacy and send 1,000 hoplites to Arcania, arguing that if a combined movement was made by land and sea, the coastal Arnachians would be unable to march, and the contest of Zaccharinus and Cephalena would follow easily upon the possessions of Arcania. Thus, the cruise around the Peloponnese would no longer be so convenient for the Athenians. Besides which, there was also a hope of taking Naupactus and Naupactus. The Spartans accordingly at once sent off a few vessels with Creminos, and who was still admiral, and the hoplites on board, and sent round orders for the fleet to equip as quickly as possible, and sail to Lucrece. The Corinthians, were the most forward in the business, and the Ambraciots, being a colony of theirs, while the ships from Corinth and Syron and the neighbors were getting ready, and those from Lucrus and Anactorium and Ambracia, which had arrived before, were waiting for them at Okay, so I'm going to return now. I mean, we had a little emergency. I had to stop for a second. Um, well, we were talking about at this moment the Corinthians. I'm going to go back to line. Um, uh, we just did line 2, line 3. The Corinthians, talked about the ships that going to meet the Corinthian. In other words, the ships from Corinth and Sicily and neighbors were getting ready, and then were met by. This is line 3. Anticorum and Ambracia, Lucretia, Anticorium, Ambracia, had arrived before waiting for them at Lucria. Crimeas and thousands of hoplites had run into the Gulf, giving the slip to Frumino, the commander of the Athenian squadron stationed off New Pactus, and began at once to prepare for the land expedition. The Hellenistic troops with him consisted of the Ambraciots, Leucadians, and Anactorians, and 1,000 Peloponnese whom he came. The 1,000 barbarians, Glenasian, who bringing to a nation that has no king, were led by Protein and Nic- Nicanor, and two members of the royal family, to whom the chieftainship for that year had been assigned. With the Cleone, Chaonations came some uh, uh, Thes, Thesprontanian, like them without a king, some Molossians and okay and uh, Tintananians, led by Sabolithius, the guardian king of Tharops, Tharops, who was still a minor, and some Pan Paraneusian under the king of Orindus, accompanied by 1,000 Orestians, subject to King Antichus, and placed by him under the command of Orinendus. There were also 1,000 Macedonians sent by Picadius, Perdiccas, without the knowledge of the Athenians. But they arrived too late. With the force Camnus set out without waiting for the fleet from Corinth, passing through the territory of the Amphilinagos, and sacked the open village of Luminia. They advanced to Stratus, the Amachian capital, convinced that once this was taken, the rest of the country would speedily come over. The Arcadians, finding themselves invaded by a large army by land and from sea, threatened by the hostile fleet, made no combined attempt at resistance, but they remained to defend their homes, and sent out for help to Parmo, who replied that when a fleet was on point of sailing from Corinth, it was impossible for him to leave Neopactus unprotected. The Peloponnesian, meanwhile, and their allies advanced upon Stratus in three divisions, and the intention of encamping near it and attempting the wall by force if they had failed to succeed by negotiations. In order of the march was as follows: the center was occupied by the Cleonatians, and the rest of the barbarians, and the Leucadians and the uh, Anactorians and their followers in the right, and Calmus and the Peloponnesians and the Ambrats on the left, each division being a long way off and sometimes even out of sight from the other. The Hellenes advanced in good order, keeping a lookout until they encamped in a good position. But the Chalonese, filled with self confidence and having the highest reputation for courage among the tribes of that part of the continent, without waiting to occupy their camp, rushed on with the rest of the barbarians with the idea that they should take the city by assault and obtain the sole glory of the enterprise. While they were coming on, the Stratians, becoming aware how things stood, and thinking that the defeat of this division would considerably dishearten the Hellenes behind it, occupied the invines of the city with ambuscades, and soon as they approached, engaged them at close quarters from the city and in the ambuscades. The panic seizing the Chaonians, great numbers of them were slain. As soon as they were seen to give way, the rest of the barbarians turned and fled. Owing to the distance at which the allies had proceeded, neither the Hellenistic division nor knew anything of the battle, but fancied that they were hastening on to encamp. However, when the flying barbarians broke in upon them, they opened their ranks to receive them, brought their division together, and stopped quiet where they were for the day, the Stratians not offering to engage them, as the rest of the Archaeans had not yet arrived, but contending themselves with slings at them from the distance. They distressed them as they could not move without their armor. The Arcadians are thought to excel at this mode of warfare. As soon as night fell, this is now chapter 82. As soon as night fell, Candemus hardly drew off his army to the river Anapus, about 9 miles from Stratus, recovering his dead the next day under truce, and being there joined by the friendly Oeneda, and fell back upon their city before the enemy's reinforcement came up. Hence, from each Hence, each returned home, and the Stratians set up a trophy for the battle with the barbarians. Meanwhile, the fleet from Corinth and the rest of the confederates of the in the uh, uh, Criscian Gulf, to have cooperated with Canamus and prevented the coastal Anakians from joining their countrymen in the interior, was stopped from doing so by being compelled about the same time at the Battle of Stratus to fight with Forbo and 20 Athenian vessels stationed at Nupalcus. They were watched as they coasted along out the Gulf by Phomos, who wished to attack in the open sea. But the Corinthians and their allies started for Achaeus without any idea of fighting at sea, and the vessels were like transports for carrying soldiers, besides which they never dreamed of 20 Athenian ships venturing to engage their 47. However, they were coasting along at shore, their own shore. There were Athenians sailing along in a line with them, and when they tried to cross from Perea and the Achaea to the mainland on the other side, on their way to Anakia, they saw them coming again out of Careless and the river Evenus to meet them. They slipped from their moorings in the night, but were observed and were at length compelled to fight in mid passage. Each city that contributed to the armaments had its own general, and the Corinthian commander were Mathanon, Isocrates, and Agatharclidius. The Peloponnesian ranged their vessels in a large circle as possible without leaving an opening, and the prows outside and the sterns in, and placed all the small craft in company and their 5 best sailors to move out of the moment's notice and strengthen any point threatened by the enemy. The Athenians formed a line, sailed around and around, and forced them to contact their circle by continually brushing past and making as though they would attack at once. Having been previously cautioned by Pomos not to do so until he gave the signal, his hope was the Peloponnesians would not retain their order and force like a force on shore, but the ships would fall afoul of one another, and the small craft would cause confusion. And if the winds, which usually rose towards the morning, should blow off from the Gulf, an expectation which he had kept sailing around, an expectation of which he kept sailing around them, he felt sure that they would not remain steadily in an instant. He also thought that if it rested with him to attack when he pleased, as the ships were as his ships were better uh, were better his ships were better sailors, and the attack timed by coming of the wind would tell best. Uh, um, and when the winds came up, the enemy ships were now in a narrow space, and with the winds and the small craft dashing against them all at once fell into confusion. The ships fell. The ships fell afoul out of ship. Ship fell foul of ship. In other words, they all started interfering and getting in their way and causing problems. While the crews were pushing them off with poles and were shouting, swearing, and struggling with one another, made captains' orders and boatswain cries alike inaudible. And through being unable for want of practice to clear their oars in rough water, prevented the vessels from obeying their helmsmen properly. At this moment, Firmos gave the signal and the Athenians attacked, sinking first one of the commander's ship and then disabled all they came across. So no one thought of resistance for the confusion. But all fled for Pernea and Demikia in Achaia. The Athenians gave chase and captured 12 ships, taking most of the men out of them, sailed to Molycrinum, and after setting up a trophy on the promontorium of Rhinum and dedicating a ship to Poseidon, returned to Naupactus. As for the Peloponnesians, they at once sailed for their remaining ships along the coast from Dyma in Patria to Kyllene to the Ilian arsenal, where Cremenos and their ships from Lyra that were to have joined them also arrived after the Battle of Stratus. Hence the picture in this Trimenid Sea. 85. The Spartans now sent the fleet of Cremos three commissioners, Theocrites, Barastes, uh, Barastes, and Lycophron, with orders to prepare to engage again with better fortune, and not be driven from the sea by few vessels, for they could not at all. For they could not at all explain their defeat, and less so if it was the first attempt at sea. They fancied that it was not that their navy was so inferior, but that there had been misconduct somewhere, not considering the long experience of the Athenians as compared to their little practice, they had, which they had themselves. The commissioners were accordingly sent in anger. As soon as they arrived to set work with Kalemnos to order ships from different cities, and to put those which had already in fighting in order, so back order. Meanwhile, Pharmenos sent word to Athens of their preparations and his own victory, and desired as many ships as possible to be speedily sent to him, as he stood in daily expectation of battle. 20 were accordingly sent, but instructions were given to their commanders to first go to Crete, for Nicias, a Cretan of Gorthy, who was proxenus of the Athenians, had persuaded them to sail against Clamodon, promising to procure the reduction of that hostile city. His real wish was to oblige the Philocratian neighbors of the Cleodaeans. He accordingly went with the ships to Crete and accompanied them in Philolectian, laid waste the lands of the Cladonians, and with what with adverse winds, stress of weather, wasted no little time there. While the Athenians were thus detained in Crete, the Peloponnesians and Clenia got ready for battle and coasted along Panomos in Achaia, where their land army had come to support them. Fromeno also coasted along the Molycrian Rium and anchored outside it with 20 ships, the same he had fought with before. This Rhenium was friendly to the Athenians. The other in the Peloponnesus lied opposite to it. The sea between them is 3/4 of a mile broad, and forms the mouth of the Chrysian Gulf. At this, the Actum Murinum, not far off Panomos, where their army lay, the Peloponnesians now cast anchor with 77 ships when they saw the Athenians do so. For 6 or 7 days, they remained opposite each other, preparing for battle. The one resolved not to sail out of the Raymond to open sea for fear of the disaster which had already happened to them, and the other not to sail into the straits, thinking it advantageous to fight to the enemy to fight in the narrows. At last, Crinos and Baradas and the rest of the Peloponnesian commanders being desired to bring on the battle as soon as possible, before reinforcements could arrive from Athens, and noting that the men were most that the men were most of them cowed by their previous defeat out of heart of the business, first called them together and encouraged them as follows. This will be Abrasius in Kedim's speech. Um, Peloponnesians, the last engagement which may have been, the late engagement which may have made some of you afraid of the one now is in prospect really gives no just grounds for the apprehension. Preparations for it, as you know, they were little enough, and the object of our voyage was not so much to fight at sea as the expedition in land. Besides, as the chances of war were largely against us, and perhaps also an experience had something to do with our failure at the first naval action. It was not, therefore, cowardice that produced our defeat, nor ought to, nor ought to, nor the determination which force has not been quelled, but which still has a word to say with its adversary, to lose its edge from the result of an accident. But admitting the possibility of a chance miscarriage, we should know that the brave hearts must always brave. It must be, in other words, brave hearts must be always brave, and why they remain so can never put forward an experience as an excuse for misconduct. Nor are you so behind the enemy in experience as you are ahead of him in courage. And although the science of your opponent would, if valor accompanied it, would have the presence of mind to carry out in an emergency the lessons it had learned, yet a faint heart will make all art powerless in the face of danger. For fear takes away presence of mind, and without valor, art is useless. Against these against their superior excellence, set your superior daring, and against their fear induced the fear induced by defeat, the fact that you're having been unprepared. Remember too that you have always had the advantage of superior numbers, and of gauging your own coast, supported by your own hoplites, and as a row, number and equipment gave victory. At no point, therefore, is defeat likely. And as for your previous mistakes, the very fact of their occurrence will teach us better for the future. Steermen and sailors may confidently attend their several duties, none quitting the station assigned to them. For as for ourselves, we promise to prepare for the engagement at least as well as your previous commanders, and to give no excuse for anyone misconducting himself. Should any insist on doing so, we shall meet with punishments he deserves, while the brave shall be honored at appropriate rewards of valor. The Peloponnesian commanders encouraged their men after this fashion. Fromino, meanwhile, being himself not without fears for the courage of his men, and noting that they were forming in groups among themselves and were alarmed at the odds against them, desired to call them together and give them confidence and counsel in the present emergency. He had before continually told them, and had accompanied their mind to the idea that no numerical superiority that they could not face. And the men themselves had long been persuaded that the Athenians need never retire before any number of Peloponnesian vessels. At the moment, however, he saw that they were dispirited by the sight before them, wishing to refresh their confidence, and called them together, and he spoke as follows. I see, my men, that you are frightened by the number of the enemy. I have accordingly called you together, not liking you to be afraid of what is not really terrible. In the first place, the Peloponnesians are already defeated, and not even themselves thinking that they're a match for us, and have not ventured to meet us on equal terms, but have equipped a multitude of ships against us. Next, as to upon that which the most rely, the courage which they suppose constitutional to them, in other words, inherent to them. Their confidence here only arises from the successes which their experience in land service usually gives them, and they fancy will do the same for them. They believe that they will do that same at sea. But this advantage will, at all justice, belong to us on this element. If to them if to them on that, as they are not superior to us in courage, but we are each of us more confident according to our experience in our own particular department. Besides, as the Spartans used their supremacy over their allies to promote their own glory, they are most of them being brought into the danger against their will, or they could would never have after such a decided defeat have ventured upon a fresh engagement. You need not, therefore, be afraid of their dash. You, on the contrary, inspire a much greater and better founded alarm, both because of your late victory and also of their belief that we should not face them unless about to do something unworthy, such as an outstanding success. Do unless do something to do something worthy. Sorry, we wouldn't do it. In other words, we wouldn't do that unless we're going to do something worthy of such an outstanding success. An adversary numberly superior, like the one before us, comes into action trusting more in strength than to resolution, while he who voluntarily confronts tremendous odds must have very great internal resources to draw upon. For these reasons, the Peloponnesians fear our in irrational audacity more than they would ever have done a more consummate preparations. Besides, many armaments have before now succumbed to a inferior though want of skill and sometimes of courage, neither of which defects certainly are ours. As to the battle, it shall not be, if I can help it, in the straits, nor will I sail there at all, seeing that this is a constant between a number of clumsily managed vessels and a small, fast, well-handled squadron. Want of sea room is a undoubled disadvantage. No one cannot run down a enemy properly without having a sight of him a good way off, nor can one retire at need when pressed. One can neither break the line nor return upon the rear. The proper tactics for a fast sailor, but the naval action necessary becomes a land one, in which numbers must decide the matter. For all of this, I will provide as far as can be. Do you stay at your points by your ships, and we shop at catching the word of command? And the more we are observing one another from so short a distance, and the action, think, order, and silence all important. Qualities useful in war generally, and naval engagements in particular. And behave before the enemy in a manner worthy of your past exploits. The issue you will fight, the issues you will fight for are great. Either you will destroy the naval hopes of the Peloponnesians, or will bring nearly to reality the Athenian fear of losing control of the sea. I may once remind you that you have defeated more of them already, and beaten men do not face a danger twice with the same determination. Such was the exhortation of Phormionus. The Peloponnesians, finding that the Athenians did not sail into the Gulf and the Narrows in order to lead them in where they wished or not, put out at dawn and forming four abreast, sailed inside the Gulf in the direction of their own country, the right wing leading as they laid at anchor. In this way, they were placed 20 of their fastest ships. So, in the event that Phormionus, thinking that the object was Neopratus, and coasting along thither to save the place, the Athenians might not be able to escape on scent of getting outside their wing, but might be cut off by the vessels in question. And they expected Phormionus, in alarm for the place at moment emptied by its garrison. As soon as he saw them put out, reluctantly he hurried, embarked, and sailed alongshore. The Messians, land forces, moving along to support him. The Peloponnesians, seeing him coasting along with his ships in a single file, and already inside the Gulf and close inshore, as they so much wished. At once signals a sudden turn and bore down a line and at best speed on the Athenians, hoping to cut off the whole squadron. The 11 leading vessels, however, escaped the Peloponnesian wing and all of us and its southern movement and reached the more open water, but the rest were overtaken as they tried to run through, driven ashore and disabled, much of their crews being slain as they had not swum out of them. Some of the ships, the Peloponnesian lashed to their own and towed off empty. One they took with its men on it. Others were just being towed off when they were saved by the Messalians dashing into the sea with their armor and fighting from the decks that they had boarded. Thus far, victory was with the Peloponnesian, the Athenian fleet destroyed, and 20 ships in right wing being meanwhile in chase of the 11 Athenian vessels that had escaped their sudden movement and reached the more open water. These, with an exception of one ship, all sailed them and got into Naupactus and forming close in the shore opposite of the temple of Apollo with their prows facing the enemy, prepared to defend themselves in case the Athenians should sail inshore against them. While the Peloponnesians came up, chanting the paean for their victory as they sailed on. A single Athenian ship remaining being chased by the Lucretian far ahead of the rest. But there happened to be a merchantman laying at anchor on the roadstead, which the Athenian ship found time to sail around, and struck the Lucretian in chase amidship and sank her. And an exploit so sudden and unexpected produced a panic upon the Peloponnesians. And having thrown out an order and of excitement of victory, some of them dropped their oars and stopped their way in order to let the main body come up, an unsafe thing to do considering how near the enemy prowlers, while others ran aground in shallows of their ignorance of localities. Elated by the incentive, the Athenians gave at one word gave cheer and dashed at the enemy, who, embarrassed by their mistakes and disorders in which he found himself, only stood for an instant and then fled for Panormus, with which he had put out. The Athenians followed on their heels, took all 6 vessels nearest them, and recovered those of their own which had been disabled close to the shore, taken in tow at the beginning of their action. They killed some of the crews and took other prisoners. On board Lucretians, which went down with the merchantmen, with the Spartan Timocrates, who killed himself when the ship was sunk, and had cast up in the harbor of Naupactus. The Athenians, on their return, set up a trophy on the spot from which they had put out and turned the day, picking up the wrecks and the dead that were on their shore, gave back to the enemy their dead under truce. And the Peloponnesians also set up a trophy as victors for the defeat inflicted on the ships they had disabled at shore, and dedicated the vessel to which he had taken at Anacreon Ream side by side with the trophy. After this, the apprehensive of reinforcements expected from Athens, all except the Lucretians, sailed into the Crissaean Gulf for Corinth. Not long after their retreat, 20 Athenian ships, um, 20 Athenian ships, with which were to have joined foremost before the battle arrived at Naupactus. So that finally the ships that were supposed to come there earlier now finally came. This is, and we're going to stop at 93. The 93 is thus the winter ended, right? So that we're going to stop here. This ends the summer. So the 3rd year. So we're going to end here. If you have any questions, put them on the comments below. I will get to them. Any comments or things. If you like it, thumbs up it. If you don't like it, always thumbs down. Put your comments and items in there below. I will respond. If you liked it, share it with a friend. Subscribe. Encourage your friends to subscribe. You can follow me below on social media. My information below. If you have, if you want, and also you can always join my Subscribe Star if you wish to help contribute to me making these more, make them better and learn from them. I'll keep on doing it. The semester's coming up, and I have to go back to teaching on my 2 days. I have to teach 2 days at the university, and therefore I will have less time to do this. But I'll still do it. Okay, and I have to do research too. So I have to write something. I have to get one, two more things written. Okay, now I'll shut up, and I wish you all a good day. Bye bye.